Hello, animators. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about compositing. Now, compositing is usually, for the most part, talked about when working with film and video, not necessarily animation. But really, when you think about it, the way we work in animation is all about compositing. It's about putting the different layers and backgrounds all together to create one believable experience for the viewer. So for today, I'd like you to think about compositing within the context of your rotoscoping project. It's kind of exciting that you can take this humble piece of black and white film and literally put it anywhere you could possibly imagine. You can also affect it in a way that creates a totally brand new virtual world that nobody has ever seen before. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about the Lev Manovich article that you read for today. If you haven't done the reading, please do so now before we get into the real meat and potatoes of this lecture. That will be the basis for our exploration into the world of compositing.
I think it's time we blow this scene. Get everybody in the stuff together. Okay, 3, 2, 1, let's jam.
Milovich notes different types of compositing. All of these techniques lead to the creation of a single experience of a space or experience that cannot exist in reality. Sounds kind of like animation, doesn't it? Milovich calls these spaces virtual spaces. The first technique, he notes, is compositing people into a virtual generated environment. And generated doesn't necessarily have to mean 3D computer animation. It could mean drawing, it could mean photographs, or any other such technique to create an image. We see examples of his virtual spaces in early cinema as way back as Méliès. In 1904, Méliès made a delightful picture called The Mermaid. In it, he used techniques native to 1904 to build a virtual fantasy space with which a mermaid lives in. Take a minute now to pause and play The Mermaid by Georges Méliès. Here, Méliès is generating a composite reality, literally in real time. He uses a technique we still see in live theater today. The landscape and environments are large cutouts of fantastical imagery. They're just large pieces of wood standing vertical with a very fancy paint job on them. As each piece slides into view, we get a more complete view of the world Méliès is building. In this case, it's an undersea grotto complete with a living, moving mermaid. Méliès is oddly generous with his patience for the audience. Remember, people in 1904 may have never seen a movie before. It's still a very relatively new technology. And not to mention special effects. You can imagine the horror people felt as they saw that first image, that first film of a train entering a train station. Can you imagine if their first experience was seeing The Mermaid? It's been said that during the screening of this film, people got up and ran for their lives because they thought an actual train was barreling toward them in the theater. I digress. Let's go back to Méliès. We were talking about how Méliès was building his film one set piece at a time. But oh boy, wait till I'm finished, because it's going to knock your socks off. So this allows for the audience to understand that it's an environment made of painted images. I believe he does this to ease the audience into his fantasy realm. Dropping them directly into a completely virtual world would have created a serious problem for the viewer. The viewers are instantly transported and may become disoriented, stunned, or flat out disregard the mise en scène as absurdly fake. Have you ever played a modern video game or experienced virtual reality? Oftentimes, those experiences start with a staging area to get you used to your environment before you're dropped into the exciting world. It's kind of like getting into a real hot bath. You want to do it real slowly, because if you just jumped in, you'd feel like a boiled lobster. His illusion is complete at the point when the mermaid fades into view. The most important technique he employs is the one of defining the world's aesthetics right off the bat. He tells us that this is a world built of 2D painted flats. As viewers, we have an unwritten contract we unknowingly signed to establish and believe his fantasy world made of painted wood. That contract is trompe-l'oeil, or trick the eye in English, or, as you would more colloquially say, optical illusion. Méliès tells us the world is built out of this material, and we unequivocally believe him. He has established the aesthetics of the world by employing a technique called mise en scène. It's a traditional technique used in reality building, still in use today. It encompasses all the elements that you see on the screen, from the lighting, to the costuming, to the placement of objects within the frame, to where the camera is shooting the picture. Now, I know this may sound obvious, but as we break mise en scène down, there are all of these different composited elements that generate a sense of verisimilitude, meaning the whole is made up of many different parts. In order to understand it, let's break it. Here's a photoshopped picture of Optimus Prime in the Smurf village. Does this image have a high or low sense of verisimilitude? Take a look. Ponder the question. I'll give you a second. If you answered low, you are 100% correct. Let's try and figure out why. Now, as we look at this image, we notice something is very wrong. This is some bad photoshopping. And when we speak of verisimilitude, we want to create a mise en scène that is believable. In this example, do you believe that the movie version of Optimus Prime is visiting Papa Smurf? Not so much, because it stands out completely. It's a three-dimensional rendered image as compared to the whimsical hand-drawn nature of the Smurfs. We notice a huge contrast in aesthetics. This contrast is what keeps us from believing in this world. And we believe it's the Smurfs' world because look at the background. It's all painted in a very similar manner to the way the actual Smurfs are painted. The Smurfs are at home, but the robot is the invader. But what would happen if we changed the aesthetics of the robot? by using a different image of the same character, rendered in a completely different way, the verisimilitude ticks closer to something that we can believe is happening. This 80s version of Optimus Prime visiting the Smurfs cartoon, which was also made in the 80s, seems like a more natural fit than the big, scary, hard-edged robot in the previous pictures. Here we can believe they're coming together just to have a nice chat and smurf along into the smurfiness. Let's hop back to Méliès's The Mermaid for a second. Although everything in his scene is not photorealistic, obviously they're painted panels of wood, they work together in such a way as to knit together a believable, unbroken fantasy landscape. We believe in the image because the rules for the image are solid and complete. Now don't worry, for this project you shouldn't be worrying about creating a photorealistic mise-en-scène to generate verisimilitude. Your world is going to have its very own aesthetics. But remember, once you've generated a set of aesthetics, it's important to stay tightly within those to create the sense of verisimilitude. Because remember, if the movie version of Optimus Prime came to the Smurf village, chaos would ensue. I'd like you to pause now and take a look at a really cool film by Corey Maccabee. The movie's called Billy Nair, and it's a rotoscoped movie that uses paint on glass. And as you're watching, notice how he uses the same consistent color palette, medium, and style throughout his entire animation. You're certainly not bound to create a static mise-en-scène, but for this example, I think it's apropos. Take a look at the animation Drumpf and Steak by Martha Colburn. This is an animated collage film. Although not technically rotoscoping, I think it can help underline our point about verisimilitude.
U.S. steak, U.S. steak, 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 steak. I promise you, I will pay for the steak, steak. Four guys, they jumped at him. They were swinging and swinging, steak. And they started punching steak. It was a beautiful thing. I mean, they started punching. Steak wounded. Steak were really wounded. Steak. Like to punch him in the steaks, I'll tell you. Steak. If you see somebody getting ready to throw steak, knock the crap out of him. Please, get him steak. Please, get him steak.
And as you watch the video, you'll notice that the animation itself is very simple. It's almost brutal the way she flips the image back and forth to generate animation. The animation is generated by the sense of contrast happening between the left flip and the right flip. And we can kind of get into the fact that it's a satire in a self-contained world. After watching this for a few seconds, I thoroughly believe the funny steak man lives in this environment and is trying to communicate with us. Okay, let's pivot slightly and go back to Malevich. Another type of compositing Malevich identifies is compositing the fantastic elements on top of real-world live-action plates. In the reading, he uses Jurassic Park as an example. Malevich also uses examples from the film Wag the Dog. Here we see live-action shots of actors in a jungle environment. Let's take a look at the Jurassic World VFX breakdown video for an example of what Malevich is talking about. It's funny, it's the same techniques used in the first Jurassic Park, just a little more advanced and 24 years into the future. As you're watching, pay particular attention to the many layers that go into creating this believable world of Jurassic World. When you see the film, you would say it has a very high sense of believability, therefore its verisimilitude is very strong. I wonder if they're going to re-render these movies in the future when the consensus says that dinosaurs had feathers.